So here I'm back beside the grave of William Joyce. He was a Nazi propagandist during the Second World War, better known as Lord Haw Haw. And he was born in the US, grew up here in the west coast of Ireland, then went to England, joined the British Union of Fascists, and then during the Second World War he effectively fled to Nazi Germany, became a German naturalized citizen, and then worked as a propagandist for the Nazi government. And he had a radio show, I guess you could call it, in English that was directed to undermining British morale during the Second World War, and he used the moniker Lord Haw Haw. Now, I filmed here once before, and a lot of the comments underneath from the pro-Russia, Russia is winning, Russia's great crowd were, well, if he were alive today, he'd be supporting those Ukrainian Nazis. Really? You think a guy who joined the British Union of Fascists, went and worked for Nazi Germany, would support a country that has a Jewish president elected democratically with 73% of the vote in the last election? That's an albeit dysfunctional liberal democracy that is resisting against a revanchist autocracy that is Russia. So if you think that guys like this would have supported Ukraine over Russia, I think you're two cans short of a six-pack, as we say here in Ireland. There's no way he would have been supporting Ukraine. He would have been supporting Russia. That's what you see. You see these figures who are the modern-day Lord Haw Haws. They are regurgitating and parroting the Russian propaganda, and there's a big audience for that. And today I'm going to react to a very popular request, which is Jimmy Dore, who does such a good job at parroting the Kremlin's line about the Ukrainians being Nazis that I think if they need to employ him as a propagandist. He does it so well. Anyways, let's get into the video. Поехали.
Tsar Experience.
Right now, the American people are paying the price. What are we paying the price for? Not for Putin's inflation, not for Putin's gas hike. This is Joe Biden's invasion. This is NATO's invasion. This is Joe Biden's policies.
It's now NATO's invasion. The US invaded Ukraine, not Russia. And who is Jimmy Dore speaking to? Tucker Carlson. So, Jimmy Dore, supposedly far-left personality, but here he's on a show with a far-right personality, Tucker Carlson, and he is claiming in this Orwellian way that Russia didn't invade Ukraine, America invaded Ukraine. So anyways, you can probably see where this is going. It's like the difference between the far left and the far right on this war, because it is a war and it is a Russian invasion of Ukraine, not an American invasion of Ukraine. It's kind of hard to tell which side they're on. I've been struggling with this quite a lot since the beginning of the war, watching many of the YouTubers that commenters sent to me. That's why I'm doing Jimmy Dore, who's a big request. It's like, when I just watch the Russia coverage, I can't tell if they're far right or far left because they almost mimic each other at this stage. So Jimmy Dore is supposedly a progressive, left-wing commentator, comedian in inverted commas. His stuff is super hilarious when he's discussing Ukraine. We're going to dive into it. And if he is not already been hired by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Minister for Foreign Affairs, he should probably be, because we're going to see, it's going to save that to last. He does such a good job encapsulating Russian propaganda. He does it even better than Lavrov. Let me just play a clip from Lavrov's Orwellian interview with Rosenberg from the BBC from a day or two ago. It is day 118 of Russia's invasion, Jimmy Dore, of Ukraine. For reference about when I'm filming this, let's just see what Lavrov says.
Как вы можете сказать, что это разумное решение было вторгаться в Украину?
Знаете, мы не вторгались в Украину. Мы объявили специальную военную операцию, когда у нас уже не осталось никакого способа объяснить Западу, что он занимается преступной деятельностью. Втягивая Украину в НАТО, лелея и опекая и всячески пестуя откровенно неонацистский режим.
Okay, there you go. Lavrov also says, oh, Russia didn't invade Ukraine. It was a criminal act for the US to be even remotely involved in Ukraine. So that's the Orwellian background that you're going to see, and this gets mimicked later on as well by Jimmy Dore. So let me just take a few clips to kind of demonstrate a little bit the overlap between the far left and the far right, and how they are so anti-democratic, anti-democracy. It's like they don't even have a basic understanding about how a liberal democracy works. They're definitely advocating for the imperialist side, which is Russia. I mean, for me, how can people from the far left be supporting Russia? I mean, does Russia look communist today? Does Vladimir Putin look like he's a communist, he's a Marxist? Of course not. It's a capitalist, imperialistic state. One could argue it's a fascist state, Bonapartist state. That's the kind of geeky stuff you can get into discussing. But how do these people who are claiming to be far left end up supporting the complete opposite? So let's get into this. Again, it's going to be very Orwellian watching some of these clips. So
Here is our favorite member of the European Parliament.
So then he plays a clip of Claire Daly, who's an Irish member of the European Parliament, and a speech that she gave to the Parliament earlier this week when she voted against a resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Again, Russia's invasion. She claimed afterwards that it would mean if she had voted in favor, it means arming Ukraine to protect itself from the invasion. She's against that because, yeah, let's see what she says. Oh, I should say that her moniker in the media now here in Ireland is Kremlin Claire, and she has a kind of a sidekick called Mick Wallace, who's known as Moscow Mick. So you see where this is going.
The head of the African Union calls for an end to sanctions because people in Africa are dying, and an MEP comes in here and bemoans it. I have to say the arrogance is striking. Russia's invasion was a godsend to the worst elements in European politics. NATO dodged being obsolete, the arms manufacturers are getting blank checks, and the Eastern European far right got to bully the rest of Europe into prolonging an unwinnable war against a nuclear-armed neighbour.
Well, he's nodding along with that. Well, at least she called it a Russian invasion. At least she got some of it right. But there you see, you're a bully if you want to help Ukraine not get it defeated, invaded, occupied, slaughtered. My last video was about, or 2 videos ago, was about the prima facie case that there's a genocide taking place currently in Ukraine by Russia, not by anyone else, by Russia. You can go and look at that. It's up in the card down below. But now apparently you're a bully, these Eastern Europeans.
But the 100 days of hysteria are dying down. Fractures are emerging slowly, too slowly. Western Europe is coming to its senses. Scholz and Draghi want to build peace. Macron is against humiliating Russia. He wants exit ramps. But the extremists in Eastern Europe, backed up by the United States, are happy to see Europe wrecked in order to undermine Russia. We don't need more of this lunacy. We need a change of tack, not to deepen it. We need to end this death drive. We need diplomacy, de-escalation and multilateralism.
The extremists in Eastern Europe, you mean the people who don't want to get genocided next after Ukraine? Those people are now the extremists? Really? I mean, what would have been the arguments in 1938? The extremists of Poland and the Czech Republic and those Baltic extremists who want to resist Nazi and Soviet invasions to kill them all. They're now extremists, apparently. It's just baffling to me how these people can stand up in good faith. But again, maybe it's not really in good faith. Anyways.
So some people know what's really going on, Kurt.
I love that comedic pause. No, maybe she does know what's going on, but she's definitely been disingenuous about what the solution is, because we've already tried diplomacy, multilateralism. How many leaders went to see Vladimir Putin before he decided to have this full-scale invasion on 24th of February this year? Macron was there, Scholz was there. Of course, they were kept at a very long table. I don't know, there was this whole plethora of leaders who went there and tried multilateralism, diplomacy. He doesn't care. Earlier this week, it was about a week ago, Vladimir Putin said, very candidly, it's imperialism, Detka. It's imperialism, baby. It's nothing else. He compared himself to Peter the Great and taking back lands that are, he said, first of all, taking back lands that are historically Russian. It's just imperialism, nothing else.
I mean, everybody's going to find out soon with that big famine on the horizon. So I like to play whenever she gives a speech like this. She's fantastic.
She's now fantastic. The surrender monkey appeaser, 1938 Peace in Her Time, white piece of paper like Neville Chamberlain waving lefty is fantastic. A recipe for disaster and for genocide taking place in Europe.
Wouldn't it be great to hear a Democrat in the United States Congress, that the Democrats who control the United States Congress actually say something like that?
No, that would be a disaster because that would mean that the Ukraine would be left a lot less defended. It would help Russia steamroll and kill them. So for reference, go and look at my last video about the genocide argument, legal argument, since I have a background as a lawyer. Let's go back to another Orwellian video and line of arguments. This time it's about their grasp of what liberal democracy is, like democracy and democratic values. I see it was 8 days ago, it's telling me, so it's going to be about day 110-ish. And the title is Ukraine Court Bans Main Opposition Party.
So we told you how Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe and how they're not a democracy in a sense that they've now outlawed all their opposition parties and they've shut down media, right? So they're acting just like the United States says Putin acts like.
So in his dystopian recounting what is happening in Ukraine, he says all opposition parties are banned, all media is now government controlled, because that's actually what's happening in Russia. In Russia, if you call it a war or an invasion, there's a penalty of 15 years in prison, potentially, for you. If you go out and protest, like there are lots of clips of people just holding up empty signs, nothing written on them, taken away. There's no independent media still operating in Russia. That's Russian, at least. There's a couple of few foreign journalists. They banned many of them in the last few days. I don't know how much longer they're going to be there. And then he's making this comparison with Ukraine. It's absolutely bizarre.
Plus, Ukraine has literal Nazis working with them. So this is Ukraine court decides final ban on the biggest opposition party, confiscates all. So that's what really happened.
No, because first of all, that's just a lie, straight off. Biggest opposition party. Let me see how much this biggest opposition party got in the last Ukrainian elections in 2019. What was their vote? 3%. So this is his, I mean, it's called Opposition Bloc. And actually the leader, interestingly, was the guy that, I can't remember, it was a British or American intelligence now, leaked before this invasion, 20 February 24th, as one of the main candidates that Russia wanted to install as a puppet after they invaded, which they did. They did invade. They just didn't get to overthrow the government and install their puppet. So this is one of them. So this is the party, and it got 3% of the vote in the last election. But for Jimmy Dore, main opposition party.
The court ruled on June 8th, and the Chesno Project received a copy of the decision. The property of the party and all its branches is transferred to the state of Ukraine. So they take over all their wealth, all their stuff. The court sessions was formally open, but journalists were not allowed into the courtroom without any explanation. Boy, sounds like a real democracy we're protecting over there, doesn't it, Jackson?
I mean, how stupid is this? So Ukraine has been invaded, and what the courts in Ukraine have decided is that parties that collaborate or are full of collaborators with the invading army, who are obviously then by logic traitors, that they're going to, first of all, they suspended those political parties, and now they're banning those political parties. Just have a little think back to World War II and United Kingdom. Winston Churchill had a pretty similar group, because if you know your history just a little bit, Nazi Germany actually wanted to invade Great Britain. They didn't get that far. They were defeated in the Battle of Britain, was basically mainly an air battle, so they weren't able to land their troops. But they needed what's known as a fifth column in order to help them once they got there. So the fifth column for Nazi Germany would have been the British Union of Fascists. The fifth column comes, I think, from Franco. He had 4 columns outside the city, and he boasted he'd have a fifth column, which were these people waiting for him to take over the city so that they could support him. And British Union of Fascists, also I started this video about William Joyce, Lord Haw-Haw. He was a member. The leader was Oswald Mosley. What do you think Churchill did, or the British government did? Do you think they said, oh, fine, Nazis are trying to invade us, but these guys are here are going to support them, probably going to become the puppet government afterwards? Oh, we'll just let them go around and do whatever they want and organize against us while we're fighting Nazi Germany. Of course not. In democracy, in a liberal democracy, Western-style democracy, we have these contingencies where we suspend normal rights in these emergency situations, like an invasion of the country. So, British Union of Fascists was also banned in Britain in 1940. So I guess America shouldn't have had their Lend-Lease with the UK because it wasn't a real democracy, according to Jimmy Dore, and just let the Nazis invade and win, right? Because that would have been a great strategy for democracy.
The opposition bloc is a pro-Russian political party formed in 2014 after the rebranding of the pro-Russian Party of Regions and the unification of its fragments under one political brand. On March 19th, 2022, the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine suspended the party's activities during martial law due to the Russian invasion.
So just to explain, the main opposition in Ukraine in 2019 to Zelensky, who's the president of Ukraine, and his party, Servant of the People, was Petro Poroshenko, not these pro-Russian wannabe collaborators. And in fact, they really are collaborators in parts that Russia has seized, like in Kherson and Zaporizhia Oblast, for example. It's people from these political parties that then show up and take over the role, not because they're elected, because they're puppets by the invading and occupying Russian forces. They're collaborators, right? So there were other parties. This was actually a really small party. It's actually a much bigger, we'll say, pro-Russian political party in Ukraine called Opposition Platform for Life. And some of those leaders or some of their politicians also we could say defected, but basically collaborated or disappeared supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And some of them didn't, so that party's been reformed. And the part that reformed is still legal and can still operate. And the original party is now banned as well. That was actually from, I think, yesterday, which is after when he made this video. So there are all the other parties that don't collaborate with Russia, don't support Russia, that aren't supporting the invading army. They're all legal, which is, if you look at the results from 2019, the pro-Russian parties in total got about 18% of the vote. And remember, not all of those are supporting this invasion. You could maybe cut it in half and say there's like about 10% of the political opposition, or the 10% of the elected politicians, or who people voted for in the elections are supporting Russia, and then the other 90% are completely legal. And also their media for the supporters of the invading army is the media that is currently banned in Ukraine. So these are not the main opposition. That is just a huge whopping lie that anyone with Wikipedia or Google can figure out, that you can just add, and was able to add stuff, would say the main opposition party is clearly not these guys and their collaborators.
I think this is crazy because if you remember Zelensky, and many people like Zelensky, even people who were more minded like us, because he ran on a campaign of saying, we're not going to try and ban the Russian language. We're not going to continue harassing and persecuting ethnic Russians, right? We are going to unite this country and bring everyone together. And clearly he was lying, or even more likely, or both. He was co-opted by the ultranationalist Nazi forces in his country.
So this guy, I've seen him also with Gonzalo. He kind of doesn't seem to really have any idea what goes on in Ukraine. He's clearly never been there. One clip, he was wearing the Z, basically this Russian swastika, or the pro-Russian invasion symbol on his t-shirt. Again, this guy is supposed to be from the far left, but wearing this kind of always very clearly far-right symbol. And there he goes off on just his little fantasy about what's going on in Ukraine, because he's clueless, he's never been there. He's never mentioned ever being there from what I can see, and he has no idea about what's going on. And as far as he's concerned, Ukraine is just all these Nazis, and they're persecuting all the Russians in the country. No, they're not allowing the collaborators, the traitors, right, who are collaborating with the invading army that has killed Tens of thousands of people. We don't know how many people have been killed yet. It could be 100,000. I hope I'm wrong on day 118 of this invasion. And you know what? The majority of those probably were the Russian-speaking ethnic Russians, as this idiot calls them, who got killed in cities like Mariupol because the Russians came and invaded illegally and killed tens of thousands of people.
And now, regardless of whatever he said on the campaign trail, he's carrying out their ideology.
Yeah, I think he might have been sincere when he was running for office, Zelensky, because he made a lot of those pronouncements about how he was going to bring everybody together in the country.
Yep.
That was his deal.
These people literally would have been calling Winston Churchill a Nazi in 1940 or the late 30s because he was standing up to the real Nazis, the actual little Nazi army that was about to invade, and he was going to disband the British Union of Fascists, the collaborators. It's just like, I don't know, it's just baffling for me how they're not ashamed of what they're saying. Anyways, let's go to the real pièce de résistance that he did a few weeks ago in getting the Russian propaganda so succinct that I think he should be hired, just formally hired. He could really help Lavrov out and prepare his speeches for him.
So Ukraine is losing.
So we have this from, it says 3 weeks ago for me, so we're going to be back around day 95, I guess. He says, Western media admits Ukraine is losing the war. No, they're not, Jimmy Dore. They're not losing the war. Russia is losing the war because Russia has no plan about how to occupy Ukraine other than genocide, because people in Ukraine, the overwhelming majority of them, don't want them there. And Ukraine is big, and people are willing to fight, and in spite of what you and the other pro-Russian propagandists say, whether from the far right or the far left, that's why you're on Tucker Carlson trying to G it up and get the assistance to Ukraine at least lowered, if not completely taken away from Ukraine. They're going to get the weapons and they're able to fight back with them. That's why they're not losing, and Russia's losing this war strategically, in spite of a few tactical gains on the ground by Russia in the last, say, month or so, which have almost ground to a halt anyways.
This is the eastern region of Ukraine. It's called the Donbass.
So now we're going to get into trying to read a map. I guess he's a comedian, so this is hilarious to watch, right? So he doesn't quite get at the beginning where the Donbass is, but at least it's in the east of Ukraine.
Russia controls all of this. This is the part that Ukraine controls, this purple part.
I mean, really, what is his IQ? He thinks that just the purple part is all Ukraine controls. I mean, did he look at the legend to the map before he started speaking? I mean, I guess this is comedy. So the purple part is the parts near to Kharkiv that Ukraine has taken back from Russian control. It would have been probably in the week or two before this video was shot. And you're only seeing a small part of Ukraine. Russia currently controls about 20% of Ukrainian territory, which is quite a lot, but they did control 8% before the invasion on February 24th with their illegal annexation in 2014 of Crimea, and also the parts of Donbass that they already controlled, either directly or through proxy. And now they control 20%, but the other 80% of the country is clearly controlled by Ukraine, not this tiny little 1% purple part that he points to.
The rest of this is Russian controlled, and that's where Ukraine had been shelling for 8 years straight, killing these people because these are the Russian separatists who didn't want to go along with the coup that the United States did in 2014 that overthrew Ukraine's government. So these people didn't want to go along with it because that government was aligned with Nazis, and they don't want to go along with Nazis. Russians hate Nazis.
Wow, that is such an amazing synthesis of Russian propaganda. So first of all, he presents that the Ukrainians are shelling these people in those parts he's pointing to. Russia invaded Ukraine. They annexed Crimea, and then they started this war in Donbass. 14,000 people have died. That's the responsibility of Russia because Russia invaded, right? And 10,000 of those people were combatants on both sides, and then 3,000 to 4,000 were civilians. And none of that would have happened if Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine, right? Then he goes on to talk about the 2014 coup. Again, just watch Lavrov's Orwellian interview with Rosenberg where he rambles about the coup again. It's a very messy legal topic. But a coup, this is the lawyer background, I won't make this too geeky. A coup means that it's an illegal seizure of power. Now, Yanukovych agreed to have early elections with the opposition during the 2014 Euromaidan revolution or Revolution of Dignity. And then the day after he disappeared, he left the country and he showed up in Russia. And in the meantime, the Ukrainian parliament voted to remove him from power and organize different elections because, well, he left, right? And he disappeared. Now, he says that he got shot at and that he had to leave and he never really fully left. But anyways, the guy left, right? And afterwards, the Ukrainian Constitutional Court said, yes, there was kind of a lacuna in the lacuna in the law, which meant that, well, it wasn't possible to have an impeachment procedure of Yanukovych because he had actually fled, and a simple vote in the parliament was enough. So, yeah, I can see if you hate Ukraine and you want the Russians to win, the Russians are winning, like this Jimmy Dore says, then you're going to call it a coup. Normally, most people call it a coup are pro-Russian imperialism, and most people are against that, just call it an overthrow of the government or replacement, or he ran away. They use different words to describe it. So that's explained about the coup in inverted commas. But I can understand because he hates Ukrainians. I mean, he keeps lying about what's going on in the country.
And there was a peace agreement that Ukraine was supposed to leave these people alone.
No, there was a peace agreement where Russia was supposed to give Ukraine back control of those territories in Donbass that it was helping some pro-Russian imperialists to control.
They didn't. They kept shelling them. So now you know. So then Russia was like, all right, we're taking over. If you won't stop killing them. So now that's what's going on.
No, Jimmy Dore. What's going on now is they're killing multiples higher of what civilians were getting killed beforehand. I think it was like in the previous 2 years to this invasion, the previous 2 years, not the entire conflict since 2014, there were a lot more civilian deaths in the first 6 years. In the last 2 years, there were something like 15 civilian deaths in these areas. How many civilian deaths do you think there's been in Donbass or in Ukraine in general? Well, let's just take Donbass, right? So we're taking Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast since Russia invaded in a full invasion on 24th of February. 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. We'll probably never know because they razed the city of Mariupol, 450,000 people, which is in Donetsk. And the majority of the people there voted for pro-Ukrainian parties. And because it wasn't under separatist control or Russian control before this February 24th invasion. And we will probably have no idea how many people they killed. So stop talking about they wanted to see the people of Donbass not killed. They killed thousands of them. This kind of bullshit that have to listen to this propaganda. And he says that Russians hate Nazis. Really? Ever heard of the Wagner Group? You idiot, Jimmy Dore. It's a group of mercenaries associated with the Russian military in Ukraine, killing Ukrainians at the moment. Who is the founder? Oh, he's a neo-Nazi. That's why it's called a Wagner Group, after Hitler's favorite composer. Never mind the fact that you have members of the Russian government like Dmitry Rogozin, who are part of a, let's just call it what it is, a neo-Nazi party from before, an ultra-far-right nationalist party, and he was giving Nazi salutes. What is his current position? Oh, that's it. He's head of the Russian space agency, Roscosmos. Well, it doesn't seem like they hate Nazis that much. They don't have them in their own military. So again, this is another lie, propaganda point from the Russian side, is that Ukraine is controlled by the Nazis. We're only fighting the Nazis because of this Azov battalion or whatever other people they claim are in charge. Far right in Ukraine, 2019 elections got less than 3% of the vote. So yeah, again, that is a BS argument. But again, it's just parroting whatever Lavrov says. I mean, Jimmy Dore, Sergei Lavrov, hard to tell the difference at this stage.
The situation in the country's east marks a shift from an earlier stage of the war when staunch Ukrainian defenses forced a broad Russian retreat in Kiev and other areas, increasing confidence among Ukrainians and their Western backers about the prospects of all-out victory over a poorly organized and equipped Russian force. The exact opposite is what? It's a poorly organized and poorly equipped Ukrainian force. It's not the other way around. Okay.
I mean, what is Jimmy Dore, in addition to being a comedian, now a military analyst? Russia tried to seize Kiev, and clearly they were defeated in that, and they had to retreat. They had to retreat a lot of territory in the north around Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kiev, Not sure exactly what percentage of the Ukrainian, it's probably maybe another 10% plus or minus. And they had to retreat out of that because they were poorly organized and they were defeated. I mean, you don't need to be a military genius to see those basic facts. But of course, the Russian propaganda is, that was just a feint, losing all those great troops and all those soldiers up there in the north, just a feint. The real battle is down in Donbass. What Russia has been doing is just reducing its objectives in the short run from trying to take a line basically through the center of Ukraine to kind of taking one around the east of the country to one now around Donbass to basically one more or less just around what's Luhansk Oblast, one oblast.
Zelensky said, if the occupiers think Severodonetsk or Lyman will be theirs, they are mistaken. Donbass will be Ukrainian. He said that on the same day that Russians took it over. He said that on the exact same day. So this is May 28th. This newspaper article is from the 29th. He said it on that same day that this happened. Russia says eastern Ukraine town of Lyman is under its full control.
Well, Russia's lying then, obviously.
I guess that's hilarious again. Don't really get the humor. Clearly said that Donbass will be Ukrainian. He means that they will take it back again. Again, I don't know. This is like, maybe I just don't get the humor in being, laughing about a genocide taking place in a country in Europe at the moment. But, I mean, it depends on your taste in humor, of course. But for Jimmy Dore, yeah, he rolls with that.
Because I'm going to do a story about them being abandoned. And I'm doing a story about everybody who's calling for a peace process as being called an appeaser.
Yes, because it's 1938 all over again. You're trying to appease a dictator who basically has already said he's Peter the Great. He had this economic forum in St. Petersburg, and the Kazakh president, Tokayev, said that openly they're not going to recognize this Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's BS that Russia is now recognized as being an independent country. And this upset Putin quite a lot, and he tried to remind the Kazakhs that all Soviet lands are historical Russian territory. So that's what his plan is. It's just all of it. So why would you try to appease someone like that? You tried to negotiate him beforehand, didn't work. That means you're a appeaser. You're doing what Neville Chamberlain did in the 30s, peace in our time. We just let him take the Sudetenland, but first time rearm in the Ruhr Valley. Then he took Austria. Then they took Sudetenland. As soon as they gave him that, the rest of Czechoslovakia. After that, they invaded Poland. Non-aggression pact with Stalin's Soviet Union. So the two of them invaded, started killing lots of Poles. Then the Soviet Union invaded the Baltics. So why would you try to appease? Why would you try to negotiate? There's only one thing they understand, and that's military defeat. That's why you need to arm Ukraine.
It's very possible that there could be a military coup against Zelensky, who's taking Washington's orders to continue telling these soldiers to fight, despite the fact that they will, without a doubt, be captured or worse.
So Jackson Hinkle, one of his sidekicks, chips in with, Zelensky should be worried about a coup because things are going that badly for him. As this guy, where is he reading his notes from? Didn't I see something about that in Russian propaganda? Yes, it's a coup. Also, they were saying that Poland was invading Ukraine. I mean, Jimmy Dore probably buys that because he already thinks NATO and US, as we circle back to the beginning with Tucker Carlson, he called it a NATO and a US invasion of Ukraine and not a Russian invasion. It's not Putin's invasion. So this is kind of the weird Orwellian world that they live in. So what to say? Yeah, it's going to circle back to, all the way back to where we started, in the graveyard. You have the Lord Haw-Haws of 2022. No wonder they're so upset about, this opposition bloc, these collaborator fifth column. And also, by the way, one thing I don't see them ever really mention is the fact that in Ukraine, fascist, Nazi, and communist symbols are banned. So what do you think happens to all the communist parties who are also alleged to be collaborators with Russia? Because Russia, even though it's definitely not communist today, it uses a lot of the communist imagery. They also allow kind of controlled opposition in the Communist Party in Russia. Also in Crimea, when they seize, they allowed the Communist Party there. Whilst in Ukraine, they're banned basically. So this is, I think, the real reason why they're upset, because the collaborators, you know, just like the British Union of Fascists, just like our William Joyce, Lord Haw-Haw, they don't get to crush the liberal democracy and commit genocide like they want to, right? So we had a genocide called Holodomor by Stalin in Ukraine. Obviously, you had, when the Soviet Union invaded countries like in the Baltics and like Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, the extremists, according to Kremlin Claire Daily, they got massacred. Probably doesn't meet the standard of genocide, but there were horrific war crimes against them. They were then under occupation, basically from the Soviet Union for another, what was it, about 40, no, maybe about 35 years, am I right? 30, yeah, about 35 years afterwards, whilst on the other side, yeah, Nazi Germany committed the Holocaust, also in large part of the territory of Ukraine, and we both know what side of that particular war these people would have been on if we were back in 1938 or 1939. I always make the analogy with the Soviet, the Nazi Soviet combined invasion of Poland in 1939. You had the far left and the far right together crushing a country in between their spheres of influence, shall we say. Fortunately for Ukraine, there's no far left country willing to collaborate and invade from the West this time, because from the East they have basically, you know, Russia, you can call it fascist, you can call it Bonapartist, but basically it's a revanchist dictatorship. Revanchism means it wants to take back by military force lands it considers to be theirs. And apparently, yeah, Jimmy Dore really hasn't gotten that part of the memo, that you don't have to pretend that it's about the Nazis or about protecting people from Donbass or about NATO, because it's just imperialism, as Putin said. Anyways, that's today's video. Jimmy Dore, big request to react to this guy. Yeah, let me know down below in the comments what you think of him, of this horseshoe theory. If I've understood it correctly, like the far left and the far right are really not that different from each other as they like everyone to believe, and how that all relates to this war in Ukraine by Russia. Russia's the invader, not the US, not NATO, no matter how much Jimmy Dore tries to spin it for Russia. It's not the case. Factually, it's not the case, Jimmy. You're probably going to see this. I know it might be a bit of a shock to you, but don't give up the nighttime job, the comedy. You're probably better at that. Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava. До свидания, до побачення, from the beautiful green coast, west coast of Ireland. Slán Niv.
SAR Experience.